Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you how to handle mixing a ringy snare drum. So we're going to be tackling a ringy snare drum today, but before we dive in, if you're looking to dial in a repeatable workflow for cranking out professional sounding drum mixes right from your home studio, then I want you to go through my 3-step framework for mixing drums workshop. This workshop is going to walk you through the simple 3-step process that I go through on every single one of my drum mixes to help you get professional sounding drum mixes right from your home studio. It is a 100% free to watch, on-demand video training, and you can get access to that by clicking the link below in the video description. Now let's jump in here and take a look at this snare drum. Let me start, of course, by playing you the finished mix for this track, and I've got the vocal muted so we can kind of hone in on the snare drum here. I'm going to play you the instrumental, and then I'm going to solo up the drums, and we'll kind of zero in on just the snare drum. So here's our finished instrumental mix for this track. So you can hear the snare still has some ring to it in the final mix, but at this point in the song, it's ring that's adding to the song, right? It's resonance that's adding to the song because this is the style of music that we're working with here. But to begin with, it was a little bit unbearable here. So I'm going to take off the processing, take a listen to our starting snare drum tone. So you can hear there at the beginning, our raw snare drum tone. The ring isn't musical and it's not adding to the snare drum. It makes it feel loose and it makes it feel messy. It's kind of a low mid ring that's taking over the sound of our snare drum. That's not what we want. If we want ring on our snare drum, we want it to be musical and we want it to be resonant. We don't want it to take away from our track at all or distract the listener. So the first thing we're going for here is a little bit of limiting. Now this for me is just control on this snare drum because you can see there's a couple peaks and a couple fills that jump out quite a bit here. So the first limiter, it's knocking it down at negative 9 dB on the ceiling. So let me pass through this first guy here. You can see what we're doing. You can see not much happening at all, just besides on that big transient there in the middle, that one peak. Everything else, it's hitting pretty much about 3 dB below our ceiling, but right there, we jump 3 dB over our ceiling. So just using that limiter for a little bit of control. And then I went one step further and put it in again and pushed more into that ceiling to get another 3 dB of control just on some of these peaks here. These two limiters together give me an extra level of control volume-wise over the snare because you can see we go from having like consistent hits here to pretty fast hits here throughout our chorus section. And the faster the hit usually, the quieter in volume. It's hard to get a really fast hit that's really, really loud. You can put more power behind a hit when you have more space between it. So these verse hits here that are more spaced out have a little bit more power and volume behind them than these chorus hits here that are quite a bit faster. So the limiter is helping me get some balance between these two sections here. Let's jump into the first EQ here. Only a couple moves here, and this is where we're getting some balance and tone from our snare drum while reducing that kind of unmusical ring in the middle here. So let me do an overall on this EQ first. So there's mainly two moves I'm making to begin with here on the EQ. The first one is the high pass filter, and then we're pulling out some of that low mid ring. So take a listen to the high pass filter first. This is just going to tighten up the bottom end on this snare drum here. So it thins out the drum a little bit on the bottom end, but overall it helps to tighten up the sound of our drum. So it's not so loose and so long sounding when we hear that ring. It keeps it consistent, it keeps it tight. That's what we're going for there with the high pass filter, in addition to cleaning up the bottom end. The next move we're making here is in the low mid area. This is where we're attacking that unmusical ring that's kind of overshadowing the nice resonance and the musical ring that we're getting from our snare drum. So take a listen here without this cut, and then I'm going to put this notch in and I'll boost it up so you can hear the nasty ring we have here in the low mid area. Just a 6 dB notch here at 366 hertz, excuse me, and that's pulling out that unmusical ring, that note that's ringing out in the middle that doesn't belong on our snare drum. So we've tightened up our drum, removed some of the bad ring, some of the bad resonance. We've made room for the rest of the drum to shine through. Now, before we add our boost here, you know me, I like to get compression in place first. So we're going to put the compressor on here, and because the snare drum's so quick, you can see our attack and release are dialed up a little bit faster than I would normally have them on snare drum. Attack's probably in the normal place for me, 25 milliseconds, so we're leaving room for that initial transient to pop through on the snare drum, but the release is quite a bit faster than I would normally have it. We're up at 65 milliseconds, and we're making sure that the compressor lets go in between each snare hit here, especially on the chorus section. So take a listen here, and we'll talk about the rest of the settings as well. So before and then after. A couple things here with this compressor. First off, our ratio 3:1. We're not going too aggressive here, but we're not being too gentle with our ratio here. The attack and release settings on this unit here for this snare drum, make sure we tighten up the drum and reduce a little bit more of the ring. We don't want to rid the drum of the ring at this point. We've gotten rid of the nasty ring in the low mid area. The rest of it is nice resonance from this piccolo style drum, and you can tell there's no bottom snares on it. So we want to keep that beautiful resonance there, but we want to emphasize some of the thickness that we have in the low mid area. That's what we're getting from this. So listen one more time, without and then with. When I kick in the compressor, take a listen to how our drum air is a little bit more on the thicker side, and we lose some of that kind of tinny ring in the mid-range area, and it also tightens up our drum overall. Getting some tightness and ridding the drum of some of that tinniness in the mid-range area. Now we're going to emphasize the top end. So we're going to try and bring some air and some cut into this drum here. The first boost I'm doing is up at 8K. So I'm going to try and give this drum some air and some brightness up on the top end, so it's not so dark and just, tinny and boxy sounding. We're going to add 7 dB at 8K here. So this boost here adds a ton of air and brightness to the top end of our drum, and it makes it feel less boxy and less like you're hitting like a tin can, right? Listen one more time, without and then with this boost. Excuse me, up on the top end here of our drum. Cool, now moving down here, we have another boost, about 2.5K, 2.58K. We're adding about 6 dB here. This is going to give our drum some high-mid energy to make sure it cuts through the mix. We have some bottom end that we got by adding our compressor in. And we have some top end now, we have some brightness. Let's give it some high mids to help it cut. So this here really makes our snare drum feel full. We got some top end, we had our bottom end, but it was still feeling scooped here in kind of the mid-range. This here is adding some high mid energy. It makes our snare drum feel full, especially the ring. It makes it feel musical. And it makes sure our drum is going to cut through and be heard when we stick it in with some big, thick electric guitars, right? One more time, and we'll do the whole EQ here. Taking it from some sort of like a dull, thuddy sort of sound with that mid-range, that low mid-ring, to a very musical, has some brightness to it, has some good attack to it. Last thing I'm doing here is just a little bit of pulling out of this low mid area where we had that low mid ring, but I'm doing it overall, so it's a little bit more gentle and a little bit more smooth overall. Take a listen with and without this move here. So without it first, and then I'll put it in. So pulling out some of that woofiness, some of that ooh, ooh, ooh that we have here in like the low mid area, and leaning more towards the emphasis on that bright piccolo sound up on the top end. Let's do one more A-B overall, and we'll throw it back in our drum mix here as well. So we'll start with just our snare drum, and we'll switch to our drum mix. So here's before and then after. Taking our snare from being a little bit more dull and having that low mid ring that's not musical to giving it some attack, giving it some brightness, and making our ring and resonance musical inside the track. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to start cranking out professional sounding drum mixes from your home studio, then you need to go through my 3-step framework for mixing drums workshop. It is completely free. You can get access to it by clicking the link below, in the video description. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you in the next video.